Connor, you know those pieces from the Gauntlet? Well, you might have a bit of a problem.
You're kidding me, Joel.
Now, of course, we were working through the hammer rolling process, you know, getting it done. It's tedious and time consuming, but the pieces are round and we had it riveted together and then we overlapped it beautifully, and then it just wouldn't go together, guys. And despite our best efforts here and praying desperately to the armor gods, we wouldn't have to remake anything. I'm sorry to say, guys, it didn't work out.
It's hopeless!
Fixing the problem seemed fairly simple. Since the pieces wouldn't go together and the handpiece was too big, you know, just make the pattern larger and the pieces should go back together again. But this problem started making me ask a whole range of questions about how we were actually going about forming the gauntlets. One, I was looking at the size of the wrist on our right hand and it just looked too big in comparison. The other point was that the thumb on the manifer just didn't feel like it was sitting in the right place for the hand, and the lengths of the cuff and everything felt a little bit off. So with all these questions in mind, I was wondering to myself, what is the wrist shape of the gauntlet actually supposed to be? See, what I'd previously learned, I remembered working with more of a round shape for the wrist, and that wasn't sitting right with me. So I reached out to Will West, a brilliant armourer from England, who's one of the most talented and best armourers in the world, in my opinion.
Hello, my name's William West and welcome to Dragon Armory. It's really good to Joel and the team at IronCrown Workshop do a little bit with them on this next video about Italian gauntlets.
I've been casually sharing back and forwards with him about our project here in the workshop, and I thought I might as well ask him about our little dilemma. As it turns out, he was generous enough to actually share some never before seen pictures with me of the gauntlet so that we can actually get a better idea of what the gauntlet shape is supposed to be.
This is revealed most when you start to look through the end, and I don't know if you can see that, but if we took a section through the human wrist, it wouldn't be circular. It would in actual fact be like a flat oval with a flat bottom, a bit of a D shape in actual fact, and this is reflected in the shape of the metacarpal plate, where the hand slides through into that oval there. So that shape is critical. So the gauntlet is flat and wider.
Which means, guys, that we've failed. I guess it's time to throw away all the hard work that we just created.
Please, no! 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 No!
This changes everything about how we're approaching this build. Now, I have to not only reshape the wrist of the manifer we just made, but I also have to get rid of all of that beautiful hammer rolling that we put into the right hand piece, since we're gonna have to reshape that wrist anyways. Since I needed to reshape the right hand cuff and put that oval wrist shape that we were just talking about into this piece, I also took the opportunity of resizing it to match the same wrist circumference as the manifer that we had made, and I took some trimmings off the piece based off what I had trimmed off of the manifer, and having learned a little bit better about what the geometry and proportions of that piece actually should be. With that all done, I could move on to the hand piece and actually develop a pattern that was going to work. Even more critically though, this revelation undermined everything that we had been basing our pattern around. Because certain features of the hand, like the thumb, need to be in specific places on the pattern, we had marked them at set locations around that circumference. But now that we're transforming that into an oval, the paper changes shape, and you can't actually squish the paper into an oval because in steel, the material behaves very differently, as I then found out. This is a good example of where putting the pattern to work in steel is essential and really reveals that conversation between our two different approaches. We remade the piece in steel, but once we started to shape it, we realized that there was too much steel in the wrong locations. Since as we began to shape it, the thumb in particular began to protrude at an extreme angle, since all the material moving from the hand ended up on this side of the gauntlet. Here, it moved to the wrong spot. so that also had to be wasted, which is another kick to the guts. So once again, it was back to the drawing board to try and figure out what the piece should actually be. But this gave me a good opportunity to study the original even closer, and I started noticing a few more interesting details. If you look at the back of the wrist, you'll notice that there's a slight cutout that runs along the back. This is actually there because in order for the metacarpal plate to rotate on the wrist, it needs to be able to extend back, giving extra articulation to the piece. The main purpose of the right-hand gauntlet in an Italian set of gauntlets is movement, unlike protection, which we prioritize with the manifer. The way that the armourers achieve this is to take the cuff and the metacarpal piece separately and articulate them together on a shared rivet underneath the wrist. Studying the originals more closely showed me that every single millimeter and every single aspect of the piece has been engineered and thought through.
So when we look at the human hand and the forearm, we can see there's a bias. When I relax, we can see that the line, center line through my hand is at a different angle to the center line through my forearm. This is common to all human beings, and it does vary depending on the individual, so it can be quite pronounced on some and not so much on others. And it all helps us with our grip. So this, of course, this feature has to be included in the design of the gauntlet, and you can see it's only a slight angle, it's around 10 degrees, maybe a bit more. It varies depending on the individual. So the offset is outward from the metacarpal, the hand plate, compared to the center line of the cuff.
And as it turns out, the main use for the right-hand gauntlet in Italian style armor is holding the lance in the couched position, whether it's a joust or in warfare.
So you take up your lance, you couch, like so. When you're in this couch position here, you need to be comfortable, of course. You don't want to be couching with a bent wrist that direction, certainly not that direction. You need to have a firm, solid line so that any force that comes down through that lance, and there'll be plenty when you get a good hard strike, or indeed if you get a lance come in and hit your hand, you can be in real trouble. You want that force to run down through the straight line of the hand and into the forearm and the elbow, and therefore be absorbed and dissipated.
So with all those changes and smoothing out lines and just trying to bring everything together, it took me about a dozen patterns to get this right. But we finally had something that I think works. I made that in steel, and now this piece is ready to be shaped anatomically. That will match both the one that we've made already. The originals do its primary job of facilitating the movement of the human hand and conform with what the gauntlets were doing in history as well. So without further ado, let's move on, get the torch going, and put that shape into this piece. Yeah, that's coming along. I can start to see the shape of that hand being sculpted out of the steel as it folds away and reveals the anatomy of my hand. Don't get too close, might get burned. see. That's satisfying. Power over steel. What we need to do now is isolate the thumb material away from the rest of the hand and from the base of the thumb here. If this gauntlet restricts your movement any way, that's going to be a major handicap for you in the battlefield, and your opponent is going to have the advantage. So our goal here from the very start is to create as much movement and as much mobility mimicking the human hand as possible. And this is a great example of that phenomenon. It's good. Let's get in there. The thumb is the most important finger on the human hand, enabling you to grab a sword or an axe. And if you cannot utilize this thumb appropriately in all dimensions, you will experience pain and a lot of frustration when it comes to using an item that's ultimately designed to protect your hand to fight with on the battlefield. To do that, we're going to take a center point, which represents the center of the thumb, and we're going to brace this point against the anvil, and we're going to move this material in, isolating the thumb at the point of maximum extension away from the hand and blending that material back underneath the wrist and around to complete that shape of the metacarpal. That was a journey, but we finally have a right hand gauntlet to go right alongside our left hand. They're coming along, and I'm loving the way that the originals are blending with the pieces that we're making here in the workshop. We had a bunch of challenges along the way. The challenge of copying a historical original, weaving in some really valuable information that we got from the incredible Will West, who shared some images with us that helped define how we approached our patterning and enabled us to get a far more functional and historical shape in our gauntlets here. All the while we've matched these pieces to the CH23 gauntlet that we're copying, getting that movement of the hand, that complex movement that's necessary for a fighter on the battlefield, and we've pulled that all together into the gauntlets here. Stay with us for the next part of our journey where we make the finger plates for these gauntlets, which finishes out all the steel work so we can wrap up this build and have a set of finished gauntlets, guys. If you're liking the content, please subscribe to our channel here at IronCrown Workshop so we can continue to work on these builds and bring the best quality videos on arms and armor on YouTube to you guys.